Awesome. Here we go. So welcome back. Really super glad to have you. Thanks, Adam, for coming along.
Easy. No,
Really appreciate you just taking the time out of your day. I know you're super busy, doing all the stuff that you do every day. It's amazing work that you're doing in terms of STEM. Um, yeah, so really grateful that you could take the time. So first of all, just I wanted to ask a few questions. So obviously, what's your name and what your role is?
my name's Adam. I run my own business. I've done for quite a while now. Uh, Mainly in electronic security. So yeah,
Yeah, perfect. So like
Cam-
cameras and home automation and all that type of stuff.
yeah, that's it. Cameras, home automation, access control. Then it branches out from there,
Yeah,
multiple ways.
awesome. And then obviously we met years and years ago. If you mind just sharing a bit of that story?
Yeah, I used to work in Harvey Norman. Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about? Yep.
yeah. So Harvey
Yeah,
Norman.
Harvey Norman, worked in computers, always been a bit of a geek, bit of a love the technology side of things, which is why I went from Harvey's and saw this and went, yes, I can do this. This looks like fun. So
Oh, awesome. And then that leads in perfectly. So why did you choose this business and getting into it?
I fell into it when I called it a day back in Harvey Norman. It was actually my parents back then bought the business as a retirement sort of option thing and planned on subcontracting everything out or the service work and just doing the back to base monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, I just popped in and saw my dad one day and saw him with this alarm laid out on the table with cables everywhere. And I looked at that and thought, I'll give that a crack. And basically just self-taught myself just the start of it. And it ended up being something I enjoyed. And I then bought that from my parents effectively.
That's awesome. And then, so you're saying that you sort of self-taught yourself with the role. What what sort of strategies did you do when you were learning all that sort of stuff? Because it must have been a pretty thrown in the deep end from no experience to here we go, I've got my own company.
Look, in all honesty, I've been one of those people that's I'll fake it until I make it. At the end of the day, it's technology. I've always figured that stuff out. From back when I first started, I had a user manual, and that was it. Obviously, I've got licenses and things like that since then, and I've put myself through the odd courses, learning about all sorts of things from telecommunications to 12 volts to all different sort of things that apply, as well as the IT side of things. Obviously, I knew all that being from Happy Norman.
Mm.
Um,
Because
the
there's
IT
a
stuff,
cabler's license or something, isn't it, that you have to get?
yeah. So a lot of rules and regulations that I have to follow. Back when I started, actually, interestingly, you didn't need to have a license. You could just say, "Hey, I'm a security guy," and go do your job. It didn't matter.
What could
But
go
that,
wrong?
yeah, that's it. But it was a couple of years after that, it became law. So I made sure I had everything sorted and got my legal box ticked. But at that stage, it was easy. It didn't take me too long to pick it up. Yeah, and then it was starting from small little panels that did a home to massive bloody mansions and big industrial buildings and all sorts. It just grew. And honestly, I think it's because I just said, sure, why not? Let's do it. Like I never forget one of the first bigger jobs that I got. They rang me and from another job and said, "Hey, look, I'm now taking over this building as well. Do you know this product?" And I've gone, "Yeah, sure." I had no idea about that product, but I threw myself in and I quickly grabbed a book and read through some stuff, turned up on site, and ultimately it's just the same as the rest of it, just a different layout. And I picked it up. Man, I've still got those guys today, like I managed to make it, and I've always done the right thing. I know that if it was a system that I knew inside out and backwards, if it would have taken me 2 hours to do the job. But because I didn't know the system and it took me 4 hours, I still only charge my client 2 hours, like it's not right to charge somebody because I'm not great at that particular product, but I know what it should have taken. So that was, what I did.
It's fair, and then that's how you've been able to keep on the client kind of thing.
That's it. And look, half the time I'd tell the client as well, I say, look, yeah, no worries. If I need to have touch this panel a couple of times, I don't know it inside out and backwards, but I'll make sure I look after you. And that was it. I've always been honest with people. So
Yeah, right. So how many different panels is there to sort of choose from that most sort of companies in the industry would use?
There was a lot, back in the day that when it was just alarms, there's lots of different brands. Bosch, you've probably heard of. Then I use an Australian brand called Ness. There's in a range. There's heaps. There's a lot of different international brands. It's thinning out a lot now. There's a couple of big ones now, and the little ones have all gone. But over the past 25 odd years, there would be maybe 10 to 15 different brands, and then each one of those brands has different models. And I used to carry a little tablet with me, but they just had folders and folders of all the different user manuals, so that when I turn up to a job, I'd pull out that manual, because when you're programming things, you need to know the programming addresses and which segment you're going into, which numbers you're going to change. And some of them would be, text-based. Others would be numbers-based.
Okay.
Like you'd literally have to switch on one of 8 different options, and then you'd have to reference that option in the user manual, and tedious stuff. Like old days, it was difficult. Versus, I set up one just the other day, a brand new one that we've got, and I literally had my phone, and when I had a motion detector that I had to add to this panel wirelessly, the whole panel was effectively wireless as well.
Yeah.
I pulled my phone out, logged into the panel via Wi-Fi to the panel.
Yeah.
Scanned the QR code on the back of the device and hit add, and it added it. And it's all through my phone. It's fantastic.
That's awesome.
I don't need a manual anymore. It's all on your phone.
And is that sort of almost like drop and drag? Like the buttons would flick up and you would literally just click on it and don't have to type as much? Is that...
Oh yeah, it didn't type a single thing. Scan the QR code and tick this box and type that box. The only thing I typed in was the name of the zone, so like lounge room or something like that, and that's it. It's come a long way. Definitely different. Like it used to be almost bloody binary. You'd go into a particular section and 1 or 0. Which option on or off. Like it was stupid. Like
Yeah,
it was
right.
obviously designed back in the day by ridiculous boffins that didn't know how to play in the real world. Whereas now, with the introduction of all the technology that we've got, it's simple.
And do you feel it's more accessible then? Like anyone could pick it up with the right amount of training?
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you go through and do a little bit of training on just the general things of how security systems work, yeah, absolutely. You could do that in no time. Like I'm training up a new guy at the moment. He's been with me for about a month. Won't be too long, and he can go out and program that stuff up by himself. Like it's not going to be too hard. But I mean, that's basic stuff, though. Like that's not. I'm not talking about a building that has 100 zones and multiple warehouse roller doors and integration with everything. That's just a basic alarm system we're talking about. But yeah, you can definitely go next level. That's where you definitely do need some more training and more experience. But yeah.
Awesome. So just to tie into that, I've heard you talk a bit about the M1 autonomous systems before as like the access panel that you've used.
Yes.
Can you share a bit of insights about why you would choose that product and what its sort of features makes it a bit better than the rest when you were sort of starting out and where you're up to now?
Yeah, so the M1 for me was my first big home automation access control panel. Like it was all in one panel. So it did the basics of the alarm system. You arm your alarm, you disarm your alarm, it makes noise, and so be it. But the M1 has a logic controller in it, and it's all, I think there's a Boolean, if this, then that, and, when this happens, do that. And it was all programmable. So an M1, you had your basic things, you wire up your detectors, you wire up that alarm stuff. But you then have relay boards, input boards, output boards, and you make it do whatever you want. So we did a big house in Ashgrove in Brisbane. It was a amazing house that was built in the 1800s, like 1870, I think it was, or something stupid like that.
Oh, wow.
These people had a massive big reno on.
Yeah.
We wired the whole place up to be controlled through the security system, which integrated with the lighting system, which integrated with the access control. And it's to the point that these people, they drive up their street, and as they go to turn into their driveway, we've got a license plate recognition camera that recognizes their license plate, ticks the box, sends a signal to the security system and says, hey, they're home, opens up their vehicle gate, and it opens up their basement roller door, so they drive down in their basement.
Yeah.
Once they're in the basement, they've disarmed that section, so they're allowed to come in. They get out of their car, they walk up, and there's their security keypad, and they just punch their code in, and it's fully secure and automated. And as soon as they punch their code in, it unlocks the door in the basement, so they can then walk into the next section, and it integrates with the lighting as well, which then turns on the lighting in the hallway and welcomes them home.
So it's like Iron Man. You're just coming home. It's like, welcome, Jarvis. Make it all look.
yeah, and it literally speaks as well. So my client calls the speaker, the way that she talks, she calls her Cheryl. So Cheryl is who greets her. So it'll say the name of the house. It says the name of the house is disarmed. Welcome home, and it speaks that over the speakers in the audio system, which is again throughout the entire house. So.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's cool. It's some pretty neat stuff.
So does the M1 panel, would you need multiple of them depending on the size of the build that you're working with, or is it sort of limited?
Look, there are limitations. I haven't found a site yet I've filled it up. And at one point, I did have the biggest M1 panel in Queensland. Okay. It was a site, and it was... In terms of the amount of physical products attached to it, it was a sewage treatment plant. It was a fantastic place to work. It smelt amazing. And this M1 had the whole site rigged up. It was about 1 kilometre's worth of cabling joining all these different buildings.
Oh my God.
And it was all interlinked. So basically they would drive up to the main vehicle entrance, and they would either swipe their card or they would punch their code in, and depending on what part they were going to, it would disarm that building so they could then go into their building. And then they get to the front door and they would swipe their card, it would let them in the front door. So would disarm sections but still keep things locked until they got there. Then they would swipe it and unlock the building, and the whole place was linked. And it would have been 7, 8 buildings maybe. And then we also had a full-on perimeter security system. So because it was a sewage treatment plant, they have the literal open pits of sewage treatment, and they have these awful vats that cycle circles, and it's just disgusting. But if you fell into one of those, because it was all aerated, you can't swim in it. So you literally... Is
it that thick kind of... You'd sink like quicksand.
Yeah, but even quicker. It's like, imagine bubbles. This thing is full of bubbles. So you can't get any traction. So, it was a safety thing. So they had to put security perimeters around the entire property in case thieves got in and happened to fall in, then the council would be liable. So we had PE beams, they're called. They're like laser beams, basically. A pole here and a pole there, 100 meters apart, and you walk in front of those beams, it triggers the alarm. So we had that throughout the entire site, which was huge. I mean, that cabling itself was bonkers. But yeah, that was all controlled from that one M1 panel.
Yeah, right. And then do you find that there's repeat business from that? Like once you've installed that M1, then they might be like, oh, well, now we need more laser sensors through this area, so we're going to get you to come back because you've done such a great job, or...
I reckon we'd almost go back there weekly because they were doing something on site and they have a digger on site and they would dig through my cables. Always out there fixing things that they broke. But yeah, in terms of just work, they would change the building, so we'd relocate some stuff, or they would add a little building or add a door, so we'd add electronics to that door so they could swipe their way in. But yeah, it was, once it was set up, it was pretty good, but it was only really then they wanted to expand something or remove a building, things like that. Because they used to have, they'd have a building like it was I think we used to call it the chlorine room, because basically it was just a building holding chemicals. And, they would add the doors into that building, so would have to go in there and get that ready to go, so they'd bring the chemicals in and would secure that building. there was another building which it amazed me how many times I had to replace the parts because they would fail in this one building. And this one building was the Inlet Building. So pretty much when you flush the toilet, it came into this building. Well deep underground. It was like 6 or 7 stories underground, this building that then, had multiple floors and pits and stuff. And you'd open that door to go into that building and it stank. It was not friendly. And there was, we had this massive big stainless steel panel, and inside that fully weatherproof IP67 rated panel, so fully waterproof, somehow the smells and the chemicals inside that building would physically eat away the circuit boards. So I'd open up the circuit boards that were bright green when I put them in.
Yeah.
And when there were issues, I'd open up the door and those panels had gone brown and started to go funky. It was like you had to wear masks when you're walking in there.
Like full hazmat suits almost?
Not hazmats, but yeah. Full on masks, because that was the only time that stuff broke, but I had to fix things really.
And
other than that.
How often would it break?
I think over a couple of years I probably replaced them twice. So, I mean, it wasn't quick, but, the fact that the chemicals in the air broke down my board inside of weatherproof housing was pretty full on.
Yeah. And there's not much more that you can do by putting it in weatherproof housing. Like,
no, that's it. Like, I'm guessing the air was coming in through some conduits or something. I don't know. Yeah. It was a mission. But in the end, they ended up changing that whole building, so that didn't become an issue anymore, thankfully.
And do you still have that contract?
No, I ended up going to a multinational company. So I used to do it. I used to have a bunch of the council sites, and we used to look after them all really, really well. And one of the boffins, I'm guessing, in like a Brisbane head office decided, hey, let's tender this out to a company and we'll do all of Southeast Queensland. So rather than just us looking after this section, another company looking after that section, tendered it all out to Chubb. Now, Chubb being this massive international company, they won the contract.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh because when they told me this is what has happened and they're ending my contract and I had to cancel my monitoring and whatnot, I was a bit annoyed about it, but so be it. I couldn't possibly handle that much work. It was about 2 weeks after they'd taken over. I got a phone call from Chubb because they'd called the manufacturers of an SM1 and said, hey, we don't have anybody that actually knows how to drive this system. Can you recommend somebody? The manufacturer then gave them my number. I got a phone call from Chubb asking if I could go back out to this site and look after it for them. So, yeah, I told them no. And then, it was about 3 or 4 months after that, I get a phone call from the manager of the site, who I'd known really well because I'd been, dealing with him for a while.
Yeah.
He ended up getting approval to get me out there as a subcontractor paid from the council directly to go out there and fix the system, which they just paid me directly, even though they'd had the security contract with somebody else.
Wow.
They couldn't do it. Yeah. So, which is, it was a bit of a compliment for me, thinking that this massive, great big company, Chubb, didn't have anybody that could get the system running. So,
yeah, right. And do you still keep in contact with him, or was this a sort of a one-time deal?
Oh, no. They ended up doing a massive, big upgrade to the plant and spent millions, and it all,
changed.
Well above my head when it went to that level, and working with the council. Sorry, my little batteries come flat. Working with the council is a bit of a nightmare nowadays. So much OH&S goes into even getting onto a job. You spend 50 minutes doing paperwork and filling out safety stuff before you even do anything, and it just became frustrating. So I'm kind of glad I'm not involved in that anymore.
Yeah, right. Yeah, awesome.
I mean, I'm all up for safety, don't get me wrong, but when you're not allowed to use a ladder because it's unsafe, I'm like, yeah, nah.
Not worth it.
Yeah, I just get back to doing my job, thanks.
That's it. So, in a week, like a working week, how often will you be operating an M1 then?
I mean, it changes. We've got a lot of clients out there with them, and they might want us to do some things, but I mean, half the time, if I've got to make changes, we just log in remotely. You know, I just put my laptop out and log in and make minor changes. Like today I had a phone call from one. I just had to reprogram some buttons as to which gates they open because they had a new tenant move in and they wanted to use a different gate. So it's easy, you know, just log in and do some programming and off you go.
That's cool. And with the M1, is it just the drop and drag like we were talking about for the phone kind of thing? Like,
no, it's a lot older. I mean, it's an old panel. It's been out for, it's probably 10 plus years now, and in technology terms that's old, you know. But so it's still a little bit it's definitely not a graphical interface. It's all, you know, like a tree, kind of like using Windows Explorer in terms of browser when you bring up your different tabs and your different drives and different boxes. That's what it is. So you click on a section, you click on this and you click on that and change it. It's fairly intuitive, but it is old. But again, in terms of power, it's still about the best one out there.
That's awesome.
Like someone will say to me as I'm, you know, waiting on something for a new construction or a new build, and they'll start saying to me, can it do, and before they even finish the sentence, they'll just go, yes, you know, it can, you know, because whatever you want it to do, there's a way to make it happen, you know. So they'll say, can you make it so that when I open my roller door, it also turns on the lights in here, but I also wanted to turn on the sprinklers, but only if it hasn't rained in the past 3 days. And then if it's after 10 o'clock at night, can you make sure that the back gate's closed? And, you know, yes, whatever.
Yeah.
You know?
Here's the Boolean map, and these are all the ands and ors and XORs and whatnot. And
yeah, that's it. So, you know, whenever the time is 7 p.m. and it hasn't rained, and I do it as a counter. So each time it rains, for example, I'd have a rain sensor and I would add 1 to the counter. And what I'd do is I'd then have another rule every 7 days, if, you know, set this counter to 0, something like that. And then I'd have a rule checking that counter. So you do something like whenever it is after 7 p.m. and counter is less than 3, meaning it hasn't rained, you know, more than 3 times in the last 7 days, then would turn on the irrigation.
That's awesome.
Something like that. I mean, that's probably wrong off the top of my head. But
yeah. No, but that would save your clients a whole heap of money. It would, they'd be over the moon.
Definitely. You know, it's like you could say maybe you have a timer in there. Whenever it rains, turn on an output, like a phantom output, nothing that's real. Just turn on something for 24 hours or 48 hours, you know. So then you'd have another rule. Say at 7 p.m. And this timer is 0, then turn on the water. Meaning that, you know, it's rained, so it's turned on this output for 48 hours, which means that next time you turn on this output, it won't turn on if this one is on. So there's a bazillion ways to do it, which is, I think, why I love it, because there's so many different variables and counters and rules and tasks and it all just bounces off each other. And I think I like it too because I've been to a lot of sites. In the early days, I used to sub out a lot to other companies because they'd put this panel together and they couldn't make it work properly, you know. So they would call the manufacturers, they would recommend me, I'd go out there and I'd look at their rules and I'd see what they're trying to do, and to turn on this little light box here behind me, you know, it should be a simple thing. Whenever you push this button, turn on that output. But they, for some reason, go, when you push this button, add 1 to a counter. When that counter equals 1, turn on that light, you know, and just adding additional steps. So there was also trying to make everything work in a fluid and simple way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then like the flow of control, just getting it, here's the electricity that needs to get to this unit, power it up and off it goes kind of thing.
Yeah. But then also the second part was thinking about things that could go wrong. So you know, like if you start introducing complex things like multiple counters, you know, whenever you push this button, so like my garden lights, for example, I've got light switches down here in my office and I've got light switches in my house. So up in the house, when you push the button on the back door, it'll turn on the garden lights for a couple of minutes. If I come down here and then push that same button again, it turns them off.
That's awesome.
However, if the lights are off in the garden and I'm in the office and I push the button, it turns them on. You know, so there's smarts behind those buttons. And And I think that's sort of some of the stuff you got to think of in the background. Because if I just wrote it, whenever you push this button and turn the lights on, if the lights are already on, then pushing the button doesn't do anything. But you've got to put that thought in the background that you introduce it as a timer. You need, if this timer is already running, do you restart that timer, or do you want to push it twice and it keeps them on permanently? You know, and thinking of all those little things. And then if you've got like 2 light switches, so, you know, I've pushed it twice to turn it on, which has kept them on. If somebody walks past in the house and without even thinking pushes the button to turn the lights on, that one push turns on for 2 minutes, which means the lights are already on. They come outside, 2 minutes later, the lights turn off. But I didn't want that to happen. I wanted them to keep on. You know, so all these little things, and then you just come up with the best solution for it.
So had you done any computer science programming or anything before this sort of journey? Like at school or no?
No, not a bit. Not a bit.
So that's really impressive as a computer science teacher. The fact that you were able to pick up those type of things is what we actually teach in the classroom.
You make it sound like being a teacher of computer science is hard.
Oh, it's not the easiest. Particularly ands and ors. Like, I think they're the hardest things to get across.
Yeah, well, because I think the way the system is, and because you can really see it happening in front of your face, you know, so you're teaching and you're explaining to somebody what happens. And whereas when I do it, I physically push that button, that turns on, you know. So there's cause and reaction in it, and instantly you learn that. And
it's not as abstract and in the clouds somewhere in the magical universe. There's something with an and you're like, what does that mean? You're physically seeing it with the cables and the output and the inputs.
Yeah. You know, so like this button just here, I ran a wire from this button that goes over to that roller door, which I'll wired in. So I know that the second I push that button, these little wires do this and the roller door opens. And I know that, you know, I could change it so that when my little buttons do this, the security system sees it and it says, oh, no, the alarm is armed. I'm not going to open the roller door. You know, so things like that. But I can see it happen. So I guess it felt relatively easy, I guess.
Yeah,
right. Like it, and I guess seeing it as you're doing it made it fairly, you know, easy to understand, I guess.
Yeah, right. So that sort of ties in really good with the next question. It's a bit of a more engineering question. When you're just working out the products to use in your system, do you have to look at also the specifications for, you know, how much cable the current will get across to from this point to this point before the attenuation kicks in, and then all of a sudden it won't get the signal through? Or like I don't know, Cat5 data cables, they only last 100 meters. How do I make sure that there's a repeater put in place or a router or something like that?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, look, I'll get plans for a job and you look at the plans and you understand what the general concept is. But I guess it depends on the job too. Like sometimes if I'm doing a house for a private residence, the architect does his best to put stuff on the plans, but I always then sit there and have a chat with the owner and try to find out where they're coming from each day, where they're leaving each day, what they want to achieve, you know. Also how technical they are, because some people don't want technical stuff. They want things to be easy. So, you know, trying to make it as simple as possible for them, you know, is the other thing I think of. And then you choose your products based on what the client wants. And then, yes, of course, you've got to take into consideration your cable lengths and where you're running it. But that's part of the cabling licensing and things like that you need to be aware of, you know. So, like you said, Cat 5s and Cat 6, you can't really pop more than about 90 meters before you start getting issues, you know. So you might do a fiber network running between point A and point B. Or, you know, we might have a really big property that has a couple of 100-meter long driveway, but they want a camera at the bottom of the driveway. Running fiber seems a bit silly, but there's other things we can do. So we use these little point-to-point devices. You've probably got them at schools. You have a dish here and you have a dish here, and they can be 13 kilometers apart from each other, up to like some ridiculous distance.
Wow.
And it emits, I think it's about, when you start talking huge distances, it's about 400 meg a second between
like the frequency kind of thing that comes through.
Yeah. So, and you know, so what we do is we put one of these dishes on the house, one of these dishes on the driveway, and it's as if we've run a data cable across that distance when you just plug a camera in down there and you plug the other end into the network and it's done. You know?
How awesome is that? How much does it cost for one of those, that product?
Stupidly cheap. They're about, I think a pair of them will cost you about $300-400, something like that.
That's so cheap.
Yeah, stupidly cheap. One of my guys uses it to get his internet. He's got a really long driveway and he's got really old copper telephone lines. He used to have ADSL too. NBN came along and it was terrible, but his neighbours across the road had really good quality NBN. So what he ended up doing, he put a dish on their roof, which pointed to the dish at the bottom of his driveway, which then pointed the dish at the top of his driveway. So it was about nearly a kilometre between it.
Yeah.
And he just paid for their internet, and he had a super high-speed internet at his house.
That's amazing.
He used his own internet, which was terrible. So,
and then he got what he needed.
Yeah, well, it was either that or he had to pay a huge amount of money to replace it up such a long driveway. So,
and all the copper, yeah, it makes it more cost-effective. So that sort of ties in with the floor plan design then as well. So will you talk to the architect personally before you get to the site? No.
No, not at all. Architects will design it and they'll, take what the client wants and put it together. Like some of the aged care homes we do, the last one that I did, the architect had marked out where he thought cameras would be, and there was like 36 cameras or something like that. We just finished the job. We installed about 90. So, it's not bang on at all, but it's not their job, It's the same as there's no way I could design a building. He can't design a security system. So, each their own. So, I get those plans and I'll look at the plans and I'll map things out and
your
come up with the
videos just cut out. So when you're doing... Yeah, this is a good one. So do you have any examples? I know there's probably like a whole heap of these, of any of the previous sites that you worked at, where you're on site and then all of a sudden you had to work out a workaround that your initial plan was it was going to be X, and then all of a sudden, oh no, this variable's come in that I wasn't quite aware of and wasn't sure how to fix this, and then it became I need to do a Y solution to it.
COVID was pretty awesome for that, and honestly. I had a building that all of their staff, they had about maybe 100 staff. It was a big steel cutting factory. All of their staff used to have, back in the day, this stupid little punch cards that you'd put in, you'd punch it in and that's your clocking in, and then you'd clock it out again.
Yeah.
We upgraded them from that, obviously, we went to biometrics, so fingerprint scanners, because they used to, ring a mate and say, oh, quickly punch me in, mate. And, they would punch each other in and it was just dodgy. So we put in fingerprint readers. So the whole site had fingerprint readers all around the place.
Yeah.
COVID then happens. Everybody touching the same thing when COVID first happens is like, oh,
Yeah, right.
Suddenly it became a problem. So facial recognition is where it went to. And it was great, because we had the infrastructure there. I already had my network cabling, I already had my access control cabling to these devices. We basically pulled off the old fingerprint readers, put on a facial scanner because they'd just come out at perfect timing. And they're now, time and attendance is all done through facial recognition. So they literally walk up to their little area, their starting area, and they stick their face in front and it welcomes them and clocks them in.
How was that? Thank you,
Pretty
COVID.
Cool. Yeah, it was great for me.
I bet. Each one of those.
Funny, and we came up with a really good solution for the client, and they were happy as, because they went from having to, touch this thing, which was something that, you imagine a steel cutting factory, they're not the most gentlest of blokes ever, and they would always smack it. Now they just walk up and stand in front of this thing, and that's it, and there's zero ways of it going wrong, that you can't, there's no misread of your finger or anything like that, or, the finger didn't work, so they just walk up with the shits. The facial scanners are fantastic, they're absolutely brilliant in terms of the accuracy. So.
Yeah, right. And then was that the needs that you worked out yourself? Were you like looking at these clients coming back to you and be like, uh-oh, how am I going to solve this one?
Yeah, well, pretty much, so they rang me and said, look, we're not supposed to be using our fingerprint scanners. So they suggested that we go back to using fobs, so the little fobs that you swipe that you probably got at your school to get in and out of all the doors. But the problem with fobs is then they lose them, or they give them to somebody else, or somebody fobs in all 10 people at once. So that's when I said to them, look, why don't we just go facial recognition? And they didn't even realize it was something that could be done without spending a fortune. Like it ended up being, now fingerprint scanners are more expensive than facial recognition scanners, I think, because of COVID. No one buys fingerprint scanners anymore. You just buy facial recognition.
Yeah, right. And the supplies has gone up through the roof.
I mean, I've got one on my front door and my shed.
That's awesome.
I get home, I walk down my driveway, and my facial scanner picks me up before I'm even out the front door and has unlocked my front door for me.
Yeah, right. And did you find troubles during COVID getting the supply for the materials then?
Yeah, and it's still going on too. It's still now a trouble. Like, we did a simple little 16 camera job the other day, and I had to buy my cameras from 3 different suppliers just to fill it up. Just some places have some gear, some places don't. There is a big supply shortage at the moment, which is difficult.
Yeah, right. And then you're trying to work through that.
Yeah.
So when you're deploying a system, how important is that every feature connects perfectly from the very get-go?
Well, we're smack in the middle of one of those right now. So yesterday we left a site. We installed every last physical product is on the wall and plugged in. But because the construction is still going and the networks themselves won't actually be active for another few weeks before the client finally moves in and they start bringing their own IT infrastructure, I've got equipment in the basement, the first floor and the second floor that I can't interlink yet. So we've done everything we can. We've tested all our cables and I'm sure we're good, but I technically haven't turned everything on yet until a bit more infrastructure from there and goes in. So it is important, but then that's why part of the job is you run the cable from A to B, you terminate the ends, you plug your devices in, but you have to test it.
Yeah, right.
So, as long as that's it, we plug the camera in, I know it turns on, we go to the other end to where the switch is, we connect a laptop up and we test it, we can see everything. But the integration with everything, I can't do that yet for a few more weeks. So,
is it kind of like one of those things like with timber where you measure twice, cut once kind of thing? Like you really got to make sure the cables...
Yeah, absolutely. Because if something doesn't turn on at the stage when everything's plastered and painted and looking shiny, I can't replace that cable without cutting holes everywhere. So, it's got to be right.
And has that ever happened?
No, touch wood.
That's awesome.
Not yet. We'll see.
Good old measure twice, cut once.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to happen one day. Like, there'll be, we'll run some cables through a building and we're done. But then all of a sudden the plumbers come along and have to run a new pipe somewhere and they'll pull out a blowtorch and they're, putting some fire pipes together. And for some reason, they slip and go past some of our cables and melt something, So that happened on one of our jobs recently, but it was still an early stage. So we'd run our cables, then the plumbers came along. They were within the vicinity of our cables and somehow they melted one of our cables. But luckily for us, it was early stage. Nothing was sheeted up yet. So we just went back there and replaced that cable. That's it. I mean, we could have repaired it, but generally, no. You don't want to do cable joins in a brand new building. You just, it was an easy enough replacement, so we replaced it.
Just get rid of it and go going.
Yeah, that's it.
So when you're setting up the computing system and all that type of stuff that goes in the background of these systems, is there much coding and all that type of stuff that you need to do to make it work? Or is it just sort of, you do all the coding at home and just drop it in and download the program and all of it goes? Or...
there's a building we're about to do a big upgrade from in Surfers at the moment. 2 high-rises, about 30-story apartments each. 30-story buildings each. There's 2 of them, and they're all connected through access control. So, you have to swipe to get to your floor. You have to swipe to get in the roller door. Their system's bonkers old, and we have to upgrade it. So upgrading it effectively means we're taking the old stuff off, putting the new stuff in, and then programming it up. But with a building that's 30 stories and there's 2 of them, there's a bunch of residents, I can't go there and say, hey, this isn't going to work for the next 3 days while we make everything happen. So with this side, we've extracted the database. I've got that database converting to the new format. And I'll get all the equipment and we'll lay it all out in the office and we'll program the whole system up on a bench, basically, as if this little board is physically connected to an elevator, So then I'll test it, I'll swipe it and make sure that these things work. And we'll preset and configure everything for this site so that basically when we go there and we take down the brain of this old system and put the new one up and start swapping the modules over, there won't be much downtime. So I've had to plan that and pre-program that ready to go. And for the past probably 4 or 5 weeks, we've had a little test system at the front entrance for both buildings.
Yeah.
And every single resident has known that they have to swipe that little machine. And then the building manager punches their name in next to their code, So we're just confirming that everything's correct. And we're starting off with a brand new database, basically, because the previous database wasn't really managed. They were adding users without putting a name to it and this sort of stuff. So there's a lot of users and fobs in the old system that probably don't live there anymore, and people might still have fobs. So we're starting again on that aspect, which, like I said, it's been quite a while now. And once we've got that database of users, we'll import it into the database of the system. And cross my fingers that it all works.
And then walk away in the sunset and be like, it's all good.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'll go from an electronic security guy to a physical security guy on site all night opening doors for people. So,
professional doorman.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh, geez. I hope that doesn't happen.
Thanks.
So you've briefly mentioned some of the different coding systems. Is there a particular programming language out of all the ones that sort of exist, because there's so many, like your C's, your Python, and all that type of stuff, that you'd recommend that would help a student get their head around your system?
I think for me, I'm pretty lucky. I don't have to deal with too much of that. It's more the automation side of things, which is part of the industry that I deal with, but I'm not what I'd call an automation guy. My shirt says security guy on it. The automation guys, most definitely, like, they're in a bit more of the completely customizable technology. So they write software to interface with different devices on different levels. And as you said, there's so many different languages. It's the same with systems. So there's so many different lighting systems. There's so many different automation systems. There's so many different security systems. And they effectively create the end user interface. So if you think you've got a security system here, you've got a lighting system here, you've got an access control system here, the end user doesn't want to have to drive all these different things. So my security system does have a device that sort of fits over the top that does talk to everything. It's fairly basic. Whereas the AV guys, they'll create one and completely customize it. So they'll open up an iPad, and the user's iPad, the homeowner's iPad has lounge room. So they'll touch lounge room, and up comes a picture of their lounge room, and then they can touch their TV, and the TV turns on, and they can touch the lights turn on. And they do that all with manual programming, effectively. Then it's amazing stuff. Like, I've seen them do it, and it's a huge task for them, and it's fraught with programming issues, as always. You do the wrong typo somewhere, and all of a sudden that light turns on instead of this one, and but there's a big aspect of that on the high-end automation stuff, and it's cool stuff, And integrating now with all your Google Home stuff and your Alexas and Amazons, that's all part of it as well. And they create their own coding that then integrates with all that sort of stuff too.
That's awesome.
So
it is relevant. But it's actually interesting for what you're saying is you can appreciate it, but you don't necessarily need it for the type of jobs that you're doing at the moment.
Yes, that's it. I still make all the cool things to work and turn on and turn off. But I'm limited to effectively what my manufacturers have designed for the end user interface. Whereas to go complete custom, that's when you introduce a third party that goes over the top and shrouds everything underneath their one little shiny nice iPad.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, it's neat.
So, do you have any tricks of the trade when you're trying to work out the sequence of events for your products? Like when you're trying to string it all together, do you make out like a little flow chart or some pseudo code or something like that where you're like, if this is true to do this and da 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 da, or is it just sort of one of those things that you intuitively do?
Honestly, most of that sort of stuff we'll do on the fly. So, we'll wire everything up and we'll have it all physically connected and then a blank database, and then I'll start. And I have an end picture of what I know it needs to look like, but we tend to create that as we go. And then once I get to that end product, I go back to the start and tweak it all over again, clean it up, get rid of irrelevant rules, shorten rules. But I mean, the more I've done it, the more I've learned. And you introduce things like a task. So, the task might be welcome home, and the welcome home task, underneath that task is a bunch of rules. So that welcome home task might be whenever welcome home task is run and it is bright outside and the security alarm is disarmed, then open the roller door and open this door, something like that. Or, so that task, we then link that task to something else. So rather than having a button, when I push that button, it's the welcome home button, which is a whole bunch of rules that I write. And then I have another button over here, I write those same rules again. And then I have a remote and I write those same rules again. I don't have to do that. I write the task, and then whenever you push those buttons, it just runs that task.
Okay, so it's almost like a function kind of thing. Like you're wrapping it all up. This is the function, and here's that button's been pressed, execute this function, and go.
Yeah. So that way, I'll add 10 fobs and give 10 fobs out. And whenever somebody does their swipe, it runs a task. So all I have to do is whenever this person swipes, run this task. And it just does its thing.
Oh, so like in an elevator, like if you want to get to level 3, your fob only works at that particular level kind of thing?
Yeah, so access control is a whole another thing as well. Elevator control confused me to no end when I first did it. But yeah, so you'd assign access levels to certain people. So when you add somebody to the system, you give them access level 3, for example. So that gives them access to their floor, which is level 3, but it also gives them access to the basement car park, and it also gives them access to the front door and to the swimming pool and the bar and to the gym. That's all tied underneath access level 3. So again, when the end user goes into the system and adds, Stephen Henderson, they just tick level 3 and it's done.
Very good.
Stuff is tied in underneath the background.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and then you can change it and mimic it and add it up. So, quite often we'll do these jobs and people have a code pad at their front gate, and the family have a code which is theirs, and the kids have a code which is theirs. And the reason I suggest the kids have their own code is because they always give it out to their mates. And those mates have that code. So then all we need to do is change their code and the parents still have their own. But then at the same time, you give the pool guy a code, and the pool guy's code only works on Tuesdays and Wednesdays between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m.
That's amazing.
So the pool guy can't go down to the pub on a weekend and says, I was up at this house and it's amazing, and here you go, this is the code for their front door. It won't work because it's on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, So those sort of things with access control is great, and you can choose to turn them on and off, and even have something like, you might give the pool guy a code, but that code doesn't work if you're not home. So if you're not home, the alarm is armed, which means his code doesn't work. So that sort of stuff I enjoy thinking about all the different possibilities of what can happen and trying to introduce those to people, as opposed to so many times I go to a site and there's just 40 codes that they've just given out to everybody, and no one really knows what's what, and you don't know who's got it. There's no rules, there's no restrictions, and it defeats the entire purpose. You may as well just unlock your front door and just let people come and go as they please.
Just hope that they don't copy that out and hand it all out to everyone.
Yeah, that's it.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that I've sort of picked up from the talking with you tonight there's a lot of electricity in the structures and all the things that you sort of do behind the scenes. Did you need a really good understanding of scientifically of how electricity works, like the was it PV equals NR? No, what's the rule for wattage and all those different things?
Or and things like that.
Yeah.
There was, definitely. I have drawn upon that stuff a lot. Like when I did my original cabler's license, I sat down and I was reading all this stuff, and I was like, oh my god, I don't understand half of this, but it makes sense, and it tweaked through all things. It actually tweaked a light bulb, in my head. The light turned on when I understood how electricity worked, and it did, and understanding how 12 volts and 24 volts and AC and DC and all the different parts of that and the resistances and it all applies. Gradually, as technology is getting better and better, I'm using it less and less. But the general basis of it absolutely still needs to apply. Understanding that your 12 volt has a positive and a negative, and that the negatives can all be common together, and wiring things up. Like it makes it. Yeah, I couldn't do it without it. I couldn't do it without understanding how it works.
So would you do any things in series and into parallel and all those type of things as well, or?
Yeah, all the time. So things like the aged care home we're working on at the moment, I had to integrate the access control system with the fire alarm system, so that if the fire alarm is tripped, I get a signal from the fire system, and that signal needs to make sure that every single fire exit door unlocks and is opened. So this particular site's quite big. I've got multiple mini little comms panels all around the whole site. I've had to link them all effectively through the fire system. And I've got little 12-volt relays all coming through, and then I'm sharing all these common negatives for all the strikes, for all the electric locks and things. So that effectively, when the fire alarm trips, the wires that I've got going up to the fire alarm to come back are shorting out. When the fire alarm trips, it opens like this. What that does, that cuts the power to my little relay, and then I've got my negatives from all my power supplies linked through commons as well. And then that opens up, which then means all those doors unlock. Now, they're all linked up in the entire building. So literally you could go into the comms room, and you can go into this little cable that I've got coming from the fire alarm system, pull one cable out, and every single door in the building unlocks.
That's amazing.
It's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
Do some systems put in battery pack power packs for backup for scenarios like that, or?
Oh, every single one of them. Yeah. They're all on battery backup as well. But I've had to wire it up in such a way that if the fire alarm trips, everything door unlocks.
Just opens.
The access control still runs, and other doors, the offices, those doors, they still work. You can still lock and unlock those. But in terms of a fire door that leads to a stairwell, or the electric sliding doors at the main entry, they automatically open. Or pedestrian gates that are out in the courtyards, they unlock. All that sort of stuff has to unlock when the fire alarm trips.
Yeah.
But then I've had to make sure that those doors are the only thing that unlock. So the whole system still runs, but the doors open.
How do you test? Have you tested that where you've had to simulate a fire and then all of a sudden everything just opens up?
I did it yesterday. I literally went into the basement yesterday. I pulled out my little red wire and I walked around the site and I tested every single one of my doors that was a fire door, because they're doing the fire test tomorrow, I think.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And yeah, if the fire guys come and do that test and one of the fire doors doesn't unlock or open, they fail the building test and they have to get that completed again. So they can't hand over the building until those sort of things are complete, which is fantastic, which is why I love, Australian rules. We make sure that things work.
Fantastic. Oh, well, that answers my next question, where you whether or not you go off and test the components. So we'll skip that one.
Have to.
Pretty much. And then the scientific principles of attenuation, where the signal sort of loses its strength as it goes through that the different cables. Is there actually any difference between a copper cable and a gold cable? In terms of the materials and the people where they're like, these are the better ones because it's got an extra few atoms that makes it.
Yeah, the best example I've got of that is there's Cat 5 and there's Cat 6. Cat 5 does 100 meg maximum. Cat 6 does 1,000 meg. That Cat5 and the Cat6 cable, if you were to strip them open and look at them on the inside, the cable is exactly the same. It's all twisted in a very similar way. There's very little difference. Big difference that's between it, there's a piece of plastic shaped like a plus, like this, that separates all four of those pairs. Just the fact that in this little tiny cable, there's a little tiny piece of plastic in the middle that separates all four of those. Basically takes it from 100 megaseconds to 1,000 megaseconds.
Wow.
And that's cables and technology. So people that are far more intelligent than me have figured out that stuff and make it easier for, people like us to just go and plug something in at the other end because there's a piece of plastic in the middle of this cable. All of a sudden you can stream 4K instead of, good old
1080 or whatever it was.
20p or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it does. It makes a huge difference. And even the way that the Cat5 and Cat6 plugs are terminated, so when you terminate a Cat5 or a Cat6 plug, there's a particular color order. So it goes white, green, green, then white, orange, and then blue, and then white, blue, and then orange, and then white, brown, and then brown. So, at the top of my head, that's the order that you have to terminate in a particular way. And the reason it does that is because the data pairs are separated with things in the middle. So in a Cat6 plug, there's 8 wires. 4 of those are used for data, which is the orange pair and the green pair, and they're separated from each other in a particular way so that the data doesn't crosstalk with each other. If you wired up your Cat6 plug, say you just took it and randomly threw some colors in and wired it up the same on both ends, it wouldn't be as fast because you might have those 2 data pairs running right next to each other as opposed to separate.
And the cable almost is a buffer space inside between the two, right?
Yeah, that's it.
That's
it.
awesome.
It's just, you think of a hot garden, 2 hoses right next to each other. One's hot, one's cold. If you're sticking right next to each other and you're pumping the hot water down this one and cold water on this one, the temperature's going to change by the time it gets to the end. You know what I mean? They're going to affect each other. And that's what electricity basically is, that it affects each other. Whereas if you separate them and put a piece of plastic in between it, multiply that speed by 10.
10. It's huge. So just got some last few math questions because I love a good little bit of math. Yeah, pretty much. So there's obviously a lot of components to order with a system and trying to work out all these parts and part numbers and where you're going to get your suppliers from. Do you happen to use a spreadsheet or something like that to some sort of tracking system when you start a new clients and you're trying to work out how do I get through the products that I need to make this job work?
For the big projects, individual item, I have to call and check and update the price. COVID hasn't helped. Prices have gone up massively. Some things aren't available. And the other big thing too is technology. Like literally if I did a quote, I did a quote for a building 18 months or so ago. They got back to me out of the blue and said the body corporate has now approved it and go ahead, can we do the quote? Can we do the job? I had to re-quote it because 18 months ago, those cameras don't exist anymore. There's new models since then, so, and that's in 18 months, so it's constantly changing. So, yeah, not really. I can't have an IKEA catalogue with parts that I flick anymore. It doesn't work like that. It's, multiple different suppliers. I talk to them on a regular basis. Some of the brands that I use, I regularly, follow their updates and see what's coming out. And, and if I didn't, I'd be putting in old stuff that someone's trying to plug off, So if I want to put in the proper new stuff, I just have to be on top of it.
Yeah, right. And even when you're making the quote at the end, is there like some process there that you put?
Look, every one of my quotes valid for 30 days, and that's it. I cannot guarantee the price won't change, after 30 days, and that's it.
That's amazing.
Now I get an email from a supplier, sorry, due to some reasons we don't have this product anymore. There's now this product is a replacement, but it's, X amount of dollars more expensive or cheaper.
And when you're putting that invoice together, is there a particular program that you use to generate that, or?
Yeah, look, we use a few different things. Like I've got a job management system which we do put in the parts that we generally use on a day-to-day basis. Absolutely, so like a battery or a replacement detector or something like that. And generally we have a camera costs X amount of dollars, so a rough price.
Mm.
But even that, half the time, I'll send my techs out to go and do a job and they'll put the parts in that they've used and the software is great in terms of it's pretty close, but I check every single one because something changed, something went up in price. And if I updated my software every single day, if I updated my software every single time there was a price rise, it would be a couple of times a week.
Yeah. Too much.
For a price. It's just not worth it. So.
And is this, like, just out of curiosity, something like cable, there's so much that you're dropping down in these systems. Is it kind of like sometimes you might buy a carton of eggs, but you only use, 4 eggs out of the carton, and then you've got this excess cable, and you're like, what do I do with this? And
not really. I mean, like I had my guys pick up some cable today. One place, we picked up 4 rolls of shielded cable, which is for running access control. That was about 1.5 kilometers of cable from one place, and then we picked up about the same from another place. So I bought, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 kilometers worth of cable today. And comes in boxes, you use up what you use, and you try to, when you're doing the job, to work it out so that you don't have 10 boxes with 20 meters left. You know what I mean? Like you try to use it up as best as you can, but it's just part of it.
It'd be almost like nails for a chippy. Like you're going to go through it anyway somewhere.
It's going to happen, and every few months I go through our work shed and I pull out all these boxes that have got 10 and 20 meters worth of cable, and I pull all the cable off and I just take it to a metal yard, and that's it. Nothing.
Oh, you take it to a metal yard? So you wouldn't even use it for like small jobs? No.
It's not worth it, because let's say you've got a camera that needs to go over there, and you walk out and you go, oh, I'm pretty sure that's about 17 meters.
Yeah.
You've got a 22 meter box. You go, cool, let's just do that. So you start it, you go to the end of where the camera is, you punch your hole, you poke your cable up in the roof or wherever it is, and then someone goes up in the roof and starts climbing it, and then you get to where you need to go, and 25 minutes later you've got the cable to where it needs to be, but you're a meter short. Throw that box in the bin and use a 50 meter roll instead. If you think it's 18 meters, unless it's 30 meters on the cable, I'm chucking it.
You chuck it.
It's just not worth it.
I'm guessing that's happened 1 or 2 times in your journey.
Never.
Perfect.
I never get anything wrong.
So, is there a much of a price? So, if someone wanted like a 15 meter Cat 5 cable, is it cheaper for you, obviously, to manufacture it? How much of a jump up percentage wise is it for them to go from that to that? Like if I wanted to buy a 15 meter cable from Harvey Norman, for example, it would be like what, $30 or so?
Oh yeah, they totally stitch it up.
Yeah.
That sort of cable costs like 40 cents a meter, and it's about 20 cents for a plug, and 2 minutes of my time to stick a plug on each end. So if you want a 50 meter cable, it's 40 cents a meter, and less than $1 for 2 plugs. It's absolutely. But I still throw it in the bin because I can't be bothered to make up a plug. I still go to a shop and I still buy 50 1 meter plugs, 1 meter lengths, because I just want to plug it in. I don't want to have to sit there and terminate a plug.
Terminate each plug.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
And also the cables that I buy now are micro cables. They're super, super thin and they're really flexible and much better to play with. There's no way I'd make my own.
Yeah, right. So in some ways, it's actually more cost effective for you to buy those prefabricated ones than building it yourself.
Oh God, yeah, for sure. Like if we've, so this aged people's home we're talking about, we terminated all our cables into the patch panel. So a patch panel in the comms rack where there's just a socket that you plug the cable into. So we run our cables to that. We terminate on the back of that. We then have to take 24 patch leads from those 24 ports into a switch, and we only need them this long. We need like a little 20 centimeter cable at the most.
Yeah.
there's no way I'm sitting there making 20 centimeter patch leads.
No.
Not when, you buy them from a wholesaler for a couple of dollars. It's just not worth the time and energy. You finish that in 2 minutes as opposed to 50 minutes. You know what I mean? But yeah, it's not worth it.
What about cost?
Again, you've got to weigh up time versus cost,
Yeah. What happens if someone sort of comes to you and orders, like, I need a 17 meter and 50 centimeter cable and I need a 1340. Is there business out there that do that, like custom build cables for people, or is it just one of those things that if you're a cabler, you...
No, look, the only way that would happen is I'm going to install a camera over there and plug it in over here. So we just run the cable between it and terminate and plug it in, If someone says to me, hey, I want a really long lead that I can plug in and then walk out in the car park with my computer, sure, I'll make them up a long lead. That's fine, but not really. Doesn't happen much.
Doesn't happen that often. Interesting.
Yeah. Everything's Wi-Fi anyway, so why would you?
Yeah. Gone are the days of the LAN cable.
Yeah, that's it.
So, pretty much just got one last bit here. With the STEM subjects, so STEM basically stands for science, technology, engineering, and math. In your weekly routine, and you were just trying to rank them from 1 to 4, what ones would you rank as the highest, most important subject area for what you're doing in your week? And then down to obviously your lowest one where it's not quite as on the radar, but it's obviously being used.
Technology absolutely would be the number one for me. Like everything I do is technology.
Yep.
Engineering for sure. Just making sure that when you're doing the physical installation, you understand how it's all going to work and it's all going to come together and not break anything, basically.
Mm-hmm. The science and maths is a hard one.
Science. I mean, obviously, without science, none of my products would exist.
So it's kind of important.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then maths. Yeah, I mean, obviously, we use maths quite a bit as well. I said a long time ago I used maths a lot, but there's an app for that now. There really is.
Don't say that to the poor maths teachers; they'll burn their ears.
Some of the complex, the calculations
sorry, maths teachers.
you have to do to figure out, the voltage drop over the distance from A to B. You'd have to work out, right, we've got 12 volts, we've got a cable that has this gauge of a cable with this many copper cores in it, and we're going to go 92 meters. 12 volts isn't going to cut it, so we're going to have to put in a 17 volt power supply to account for the voltage drop over that distance. Whereas now we either use science, which makes it Wi-Fi, or you use technology, which has an app which tells you put in the distance and where you want to go, and it says, here you go, there's your voltage. Yeah, maths is the last one. I'm sorry, maths teacher, Mr. Henderson.
That's okay. That's all right. It's important in other places. So you pretty much would go technology, engineering, science, then the math?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, awesome.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much everything I wanted to go through today. Really appreciate going through that product and how the M1 works. There's a lot of interesting stuff in there. If you wouldn't mind, we could catch up, maybe just do that license plate. I really was interested if we could just sort of pick that apart and see if there's some engineering and go through the STEM things with that at another time.
Yeah, there's some cool stuff. Like I've got thermal cameras, license plate recognition cameras, little PTZ cameras, ones that you can control. A lot of wireless cameras, and there's cameras that pick up people versus vehicles. Cameras that you can draw a digital line across an area, and if somebody crosses that line, it triggers alarms and triggers notifications. Oh, awesome. I mean, there's even cameras now. I was in China a while ago at one of the manufacturers. They had cameras that you could literally load up a shape, and if that shape was detected, it would trigger an alarm. And the test that they had a little piggy bank, a little pink piggy bank, and that's what they scanned and loaded into this camera system. And when you took that piggy bank and you walked past that camera, it triggered the alarm. It identified that. So
the piggy bank.
Yeah, it was awesome. So real world applications, you have somebody walking into a particular building carrying something they shouldn't be carrying, triggers an alarm. Or the opposite is, you've got a construction site, you've got a camera surveying the entire site. If it's looking for a hard hat on every single person, if it finds a person without a hard hat, it flags the alarm, triggers a safety officer. Yeah, awesome.
That's
awesome stuff. So
Well,
the
perfect.
analytics that you're getting with CCTV is some pretty cool stuff these days.
That's awesome. Well, I look forward to hearing a little bit more about that. I'll try and structure a few questions just to ask you on that.
Sounds good, mate.
Awesome. Thanks again, and talk soon.
No drama.
See you, mate.
Gotcha.